have to deal with the fact that Jesus' body he died by crucifixion, he was buried, and then all of a sudden his body went missing. All right, so this is the last session 4, evidences for the resurrection. Because of the time frame, I'll try to go through this fairly quickly to respect your time. So evidences for the resurrection. There are indisputable evidences for the resurrection. I like what Gary Habermas has put together. He's been able to show that of the 3,400 works, both skeptical and believing scholars on the resurrection, the majority of writers accept the following 12 events as historical fact. And then you'll see that there are bolded facts, and they are what Habermas calls the minimal facts for the resurrection. Now, this is important. I'm going to be presenting 12 facts that, for the most part, whether you're a secular historian or a Christian historian, the evidence for that these facts are true are very compelling. You can't really deny them. So what you're going to find is, rather than denying these facts, denying these evidences, most secular historians who are not Christian deny the conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead. But what we're going to find is that's going to be very hard to do, to actually deny that Jesus rose from the dead. And so we have 12. Of the 12, there are 5 facts that I'm going to have bolded. And these are the facts that are even more so concrete, that even more so are very, very difficult to deny. And because of that, you have to, whether you're secular, whether you're Christian, you have to deal with these 5 facts. You can't deny them, and most choose not to. So the first one is actually 0. This is one that I added. The reason why I added it is because it's assumed by all the other evidences, but it's also very important. I don't know if you've come across anybody like this, but I've come across people who have claimed that Jesus was not a real historical person. Now, if you don't know your stuff, maybe you're going to get caught off guard by this statement. Like, how do you know that Jesus was an historical person? And you're like, I'm not sure. But Jesus was a real historical person. Not only do these 12 facts assume that much, so that's that much as we have for the evidence of him being a real person. But even Bart Ehrman, professor of religious studies at UNC and a radical skeptic of the New Testament, this is what he said about people who do not believe that Jesus was a historical person. He said, "This is not even an issue for scholars of antiquity. The reason for thinking Jesus existed is because he is abundantly attested in early sources. If you want to go where the evidence goes, I think that atheists have done themselves a disservice by jumping on the bandwagon of mythicism, because frankly, it makes you look foolish to the outside world. If that's what you're going to believe, you just look foolish." Now, this is a radical skeptic of the New Testament. This is Bart Ehrman speaking. He actually debated a pastor of mine in North Carolina. This guy who doesn't believe in the reliability of Scripture will at the very least come to the conclusion that Jesus was a real historical person. To deny that Jesus was a real historical person would be akin to someone believing that the Holocaust never happened or that no one ever landed on the moon. These conspiracy theories, that's all that could be accounted to. So we come across the first bolded fact, one of the minimal facts there by Gary Habermas. It is very, very concrete that Jesus died by crucifixion. We have records of his trial here, indicating that he died by crucifixion. So very solid evidence for that. Good evidence that Jesus was buried, and that his death caused his disciples to despair and lose hope, believing that his life had ended. And this is going to be important later, but we have pretty good evidence to suggest, most scholars would agree, that when Jesus died, his disciples believed he actually died, and this is something they weren't entirely expecting, and so this caused them to be go into some despair. Next, the second of the bolded facts, that the tomb was empty a few days later. Now, this is a very interesting fact. You have to deal with the empty tomb. You can't deny the empty tomb. I'm just thinking about, what did the Jews say when the claim that the tomb was empty? They stole the body. Exactly. They're not denying that the tomb was empty, that Jesus' tomb was empty. They were just providing a different explanation for the empty tomb. We have to deal with the fact that the tomb was empty. And besides, if the tomb was not empty, the Roman authorities and the Jewish authorities would have loved to go into the tomb, open it up, and say, here's his body. He claimed that he rose from the dead, but here it is. Here's his body. But they don't do that. We don't have any account along that line of anybody trying to do that. In fact, I spoke to a Jew a few years back, and he made mention that, they still believe, at least his particular sect still believe, that the disciples stole Jesus' body. You have to deal with the fact that Jesus' body he died by crucifixion, he was buried, and then all of a sudden his body went missing. Now, it's very interesting, his body all of a sudden went missing, and then this next bulleted fact, the disciples had experiences that they believed were literal appearances of the risen Jesus. Now, this is very important as well. So we're not kind of circular reasoning by the fact that they saw. I'm not saying here that they did see the literal appearance of Jesus. They at least believed they saw literal appearances of Jesus. And so you have that Jesus died by crucifixion. He was buried. The tomb ended up empty. And then the disciples believed that they had seen the risen Jesus. Now, this is very important because, frankly speaking, if this was a big lie, this would be very, very odd. So if they actually stole the body, the fact that they believed that they saw Jesus alive would be very strange because they would know otherwise. So then 6 disciples were transformed from doubters who were afraid to identify themselves with Jesus to bold proclaimers of his death and resurrection. Again, if this was a lie, and they knew it to be a lie, because they stole the body or something along that line, this would be very odd to have happen. The motivation is just not there. Now, people do die for lies. We see this all the time. We know Islamic bombers will go and take the lie for like 70 versions or whatever. And so we know that people will die for a lie, but how many people die for a lie they know is a lie? Not many people. And we know that of the apostles, the only one that actually wasn't executed was John, but he was put out on the island of Patmos. And so people just don't do that when they know it's a lie. If they actually stole the body of Jesus, they would not be dying for their faith. They would not be boldly proclaiming their faith, especially since the message was the center of preaching of the early church. This is what the early church believed, and this is what they taught. It wasn't some sort of myth I brought up, but on top of that, this message was especially proclaimed in Jerusalem, where Jesus died and was buried shortly thereafter. Now, if Jesus never rose from the dead, and this is a big, fat lie, this would be a very strange place to be preaching that message, because they'd have quite a bit enough of people who would be like, and no, he's still in the tomb. Or, and no, you say I saw Jesus, but I didn't. When you claim that there's 500 people that saw Jesus rise from the dead, and you say, go and talk to them, you're putting everything on the line. And then you are not going to be claiming that Jesus rose from the dead if you're not absolutely confident, because again, you have plenty of people who are right there who could testify otherwise if you were lying. And so, number 9, the church is born in Jerusalem and grew rapidly, so very similar to number 8. So this would not make sense if it was a lie. 10 Orthodox Jews who believed in Jesus made Sunday their primary day of worship. Now, this is very important. The Jews, Orthodox Jews, Sabbath was very, very important to them. To give up the Sabbath from worshiping God on Saturday to worshiping God on Sunday because they believe that Jesus rose from the dead. That's very big for them. They would not do that if they did not truly believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And then 11 and 12, James, half-brother of Jesus, converted to faith when he saw what he believed was the resurrected Jesus. How many people would believe if their sibling went to them and said, I'm God? Yeah, James had the same problem. And so you have somebody that was not initially that interested in the faith, and all of a sudden, bam, like Christian leader in the church. Why? Because he claims he saw the risen Lord, the resurrected Jesus. So that is important because you have some people. Remember the mother? I talked about the mother who had wishful thinking, had blind faith that her son was okay. Now this mother, because she's just willing herself to believe that her child is okay, may find herself hallucinating a little bit and seeing her son here and there on the street. There's instances of people saying, I think I saw my son or whatever, because they want it so badly. Not very likely with over 500 people, but nevertheless, you have James and Paul, or Saul, prior who were not very interested in the true claims of Christianity. In fact, Saul was trying to shut Christianity down. Saul is a very, very strong evidence here because here you have somebody wanting to shut Christianity down, was hunting them down. He knew what it was to be a Christian, and yet all of a sudden he becomes one of the greatest Christian missionaries. Why? Because he claimed to have seen Jesus. Now, you could try some convoluted way to explain these evidences. Some and most secularists have, but they're very, very weird. Some of them more weird than others. I got a couple examples up here. That Jesus had a twin. Surprise! But this is very convoluted. No proof at all that Jesus actually had a twin. The only reason for bringing it up is because they're trying to explain it outside of Jesus actually rising from the dead. And of course, this just doesn't make sense. Somebody would have known that Jesus had a twin. Like, hey, what do you know? And besides, Jesus' body would have still been in the tomb, so they could have easily brought the body out and said, nope, see, that's his twin. This is Jesus right here. But they didn't. And so it just has no weight to it at all. The women went to the wrong tomb. Now, that's a very, very low view of women, I think. Give them a little bit more credit than that, please. The women went to the wrong tomb. Like they would have definitely known what tomb to go to. And besides, again, you have to deal with the empty tomb. If they would have gone to the wrong tomb and then started saying, Jesus rose from the dead, Jewish authorities could have easily been, nope, here's Jesus' body right here. But they didn't. We don't have any instances of that. We have to deal with the empty tomb. And then there's the view that Jesus did not die, he just fainted. It's called the swoon theory. There's a lot of problems with that theory. First of all, Romans were excellent at killing people. In fact, if you fail to kill the person you were trying to execute, you're taking their place. So you wanted to make sure very, very well that the person you were executing was in fact dead. On top of that, Jesus somehow would have survived the whipping prior, the crucifixion, the stab in the side, and somehow would have still survived in the cold, dark, wet tomb for 3 days. And then after all that, would have had to been able to get up, roll this huge stone away by himself, get past the guards, and then on top of all of that, somehow try to convince his disciples that his mangled body was a resurrected body. Like, hey guys, I'm resurrected. Like, that would not be very convincing. You would not, and again, it goes back to like it happened in Jerusalem. If Jesus really, if Jesus was just fainted, his mangled body would not be convincing very many people, and most people would be pointing to and saying, no, that's Jesus right there. He's in the ICU. He's not. He did not rise from the dead, but that's not what we hear throughout the rest of history. that what we have is appearances of what seemed to be Jesus in a glorified body, seems to be in perfect health, and then disappears out of history. So none of these theories, and we could go on the other theories, maybe that could be another seminar for another time, but they just don't add up. They don't make sense. And there is someone, I forgot his name now, but he uses what court cases uses to determine if somebody's lying or if a theory is a good theory. And so he puts the testimony of the Gospels up against that, and it shows that these alternative theories just don't work out because there's holes in those theories, whereas just the conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead makes the most sense and therefore would most likely be true. So no adequate responses have been provided unless you dismiss a miracle from the beginning. Unfortunately, same guy, Bart Ehrman, I remember reading a debate by him, and he was dismissing the possibility of miracles because his definition of miracle was something that the least likely thing to happen. It's just, out of any other possibilities, a miracle by definition is the least likely event to happen. Well, that automatically dismisses miracles from the beginning. It means no matter how weird the theory Jesus had a twin is, it's still far more plausible to him than that it was a miracle. He dismisses a miracle by the very definition of a miracle. But if you don't dismiss the possibility of a miracle from the very beginning, you realize that all these other theories to explain these facts are just far and above, way out of the way, and absurd compared to what the gospel writers actually said and believed, that Jesus rose from the dead, that a miracle actually happened. So this is my working cumulative approach. So we looked at cumulative case apologetics. And so this is my cumulative argument here. Again, it's a working argument because it's dealing with different types of arguments, but you should get the gist of it. It says if God exists, miracles are possible. Miracles are impossible apart from God. If miracles are possible, then the best explanation of the facts surrounding the resurrection of Jesus is that a miracle happened. If God exists, then the best explanation is that Jesus rose from the dead. God most likely exists, therefore Jesus most likely rose from the dead. And if Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity probably is true, therefore Christianity is probably true. All that to say that if God exists, and we have good arguments to say that God exists, then miracles are possible. And if we don't dismiss miracles out from the very beginning, the only plausible explanation for all the facts that we know surrounding the resurrection is that Jesus actually rose from the dead. And once we do that, we have a very strong case for Christianity. I don't know how many people would actually argue that, oh, well, no, just because Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity isn't true. That's one of those, like, skeptical responses. It's like, yeah, but that's why I'm saying here that Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is probably true. We have a very, very good reason to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, because people don't normally do that he is who he says he is, and we can trust that he says. So Christianity is true. So this is my cumulative case approach. I think it's useful in sharing gospel with people as a quick way to, you don't have to go through that exactly, but a quick way to just say, hey, here's some quick arguments for the existence of God that makes God at least probable that he exists. Well, now let's combine that with the fact that the evidence for the resurrection is so compelling that miracles is the only really valuable option here. So when you combine the plausibility of the existence of God plus the only plausible explanation for the resurrection being that a miracle happened, then we have that Christianity is true. So I think that's very helpful. And so that, for the most part, is going to conclude the session with that. So what now? The first thing I want to ask you is, have you put your faith in Jesus? So all this apologetics, all this stuff is not going to do you any good if you don't have a personal relationship with Christ. And we talked about what is faith. Faith is not blind. We're not talking about a blind leap and just willing yourself to salvation, willing yourself to God, but a trust in God. My question to you is, have you put your faith, have you put your trust in God, in Christ Jesus as your Lord and Savior? Because otherwise you're still dead in your sins and you need Christ. So my first question to you is, have you put your faith in Jesus? Secondly, if you have, and even if you haven't, I want you to seek to learn more about defending the true claims of the Christian faith. If you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, maybe you're coming across questions and objections. This is the best time to go ahead and start looking at answers. There are answers to your questions. There are good people to look up, and there are not so good people to look up. I can help you with that if that's one of the issues that you're having. But if you're a Christian, this is, seek to learn how to defend your faith. Learn what you believe and why you believe it, so that when you're sharing your faith, you're not a bad Christian apologist. Because remember, you don't have a choice. You're either going to be a good Christian apologist or a bad Christian apologist. So learn how to defend your faith, so when you're sharing your faith, you're going to be a good Christian apologist. Use what you learn to encourage your faith and to aid in sharing your faith with others. So what you've learned today, what hopefully you'll learn as you continue, use that to encourage your faith and encourage you to share your faith with others. Spread the word. Our churches need to know how to defend their faith. I would be greatly appreciated if you can let the other churches know in the area that there is somebody out here that is seeking to teach, to equip our churches to defend their faith. But even if it's not me, get our churches interested and help them to know why we need the gospel. That's why I presented in the beginning what is apologetics and why is it important. Our churches need to know that apologetics is important. We need to know how to defend our faith. And so even if it's not having me come to the church, if they can just take the next step to learn how to defend their faith. And prepare for further seminars. I'm hoping for other opportunities, whether it's in a Sunday school class, another seminar, or even at another church, in another fashion for that. This is the first step in many steps for Faith and Knowledge Ministries, a ministry that I'm starting. And so I'm going to be posting these videos up so you can review this, look for future videos, look for future opportunities. I'm going to hopefully be here for a while. But with that, I do need your help, if possible. Donate. I'm going to have, this is information regarding me and the ministry, and I don't want you to feel compelled to. But with that, with starting a ministry, you have many costs when it comes to technological travel and so on and so forth. So if you feel that this is something you want to aid in the cause, then great. If you don't, then I completely understand. So with that said, though, I just want to encourage you again to learn how to defend your faith. For those who are interested, my blog there is matthewfiles.blogspot.com. You can see it on the bottom. And I will be posting the videos up with the slideshow here, so if you miss any of the information, you can get it from there. So with that said, thank you guys for coming. If you guys have any questions, you can raise your hand. I can answer your questions. Otherwise, we can go ahead and end the session. Are there any questions before we don't want to end the audio yet? Are there any questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can't help but see how Jesus impacted the entire world. You even look at other religions around the world; they cannot not deal with Jesus. They have to deal with Jesus. I mean, look at what Islam has done with Jesus. Jesus is one of their greatest prophets beyond Muhammad. They have to deal with him because even they have to testify that Jesus was there and he did great things. He did miraculous things. And so they have to deal with him. And I believe that they even believe that he's supposed to come back. And I mean, like you said, how the dating system is BC AD, like you just can't deny the fact that Jesus came into the world and we were totally changed by that instance. And that's, I mean, that's got to count for the fact that it is such a movement that has been started and continues to grow by God.